The Canon R50V and the Sony a6700 are both fantastic cameras. Today we're going to compare both of these APS-C cameras' image quality while I'm using them in real-world situations. See if you can tell the difference on which camera got which shot in this low-light environment. I can see that camera A has more saturation to it and a little bit more of an overall reddish hue. Also, the shadows are more crushed than we see with camera B, but camera B gives off a purplish sky color. Now, I don't have much of a problem with that reddish hue that we get with camera A as much as I do with all of the noise that I'm seeing, especially in the skin tones. Camera B does a much nicer job keeping the noise down and giving us a more realistic looking type of skin tones. But this isn't the only test that's important. When we jump into the low light hours and we look at the skin tones, surprisingly camera A starts to do a little bit better. Yes, it's true that I still see a little bit more saturation in the skin tones, but they look a lot more realistic, at least to my eyes. Camera B, on the other hand, at least in this lighting environment, almost puts a green or brown type of colorization on the skin tones. Now, I wouldn't say this is across the board, because here you can see skin tones look slightly better with camera B, but I'd say that's probably due to the better light source that we have, which happens to be bouncing sunlight. And if there's a lot of movement going on, I really can't sit here and tell you that one of these cameras' skin tones look better than the other. It kind of goes to show that in program auto exposure, both cameras do about the same. Now, when I put the cameras into a controlled lighting environment and I switch them over to manual exposure, I think the skin tones on camera A are a little bit too saturated for my liking. I really like the way camera B looks better here. The bottom line is that both cameras are very capable. This is not a sponsored video. Sony didn't sponsor me and Canon didn't sponsor me. In fact, nobody sponsored me at all. This is just me sharing my honest thoughts with you. But before we get into which camera shot which shot, I've got something pretty cool to share with you. Lately, I've been digging through some old camcorder footage from the year 2000s. There is just something about that nostalgic look that throws me way back. So I went ahead and created some custom camcorder LUTs for both of these cameras, the R50V and the Sony a6700. That gives you that 2000s camcorder look. After a bunch of tweaking, they're finally done, and I've dropped the links to both of those LUT packs in the description in case you want to check them out. Maybe you have either of these cameras and you want to get that camcorder look and you don't want to go onto eBay and do all this research and then go out and then figure out how to digitize that footage. Well, I've got it figured out for you. And I didn't only include custom LUTs with that pack, I also included some effect presets that will add some bloom and noise to really sell it as a camcorder. I'll leave links to those LUT packs in the description. Now, if you don't own either of these cameras, but you'd like to see how their image files will perform in your editing software, I've included free project files for each of these cameras that I shot as a download link so you can download the files and mess around with them in your editor. And if you're still on the fence by the end of this video on which one of these two cameras is right for you, I made 2 free quizzes that will help you figure out which camera or lens fits your needs best. It's pretty easy. You just answer a few questions and based on your answers, it will populate for you the right camera. Today, we're gonna be looking at both cameras' image colors straight out of camera. We're gonna see how both of these cameras perform when we're doing green screen work. We'll do a sharpness test with both of them along with some photography. I'll also do some vlogging with both of these cameras and their grips. I'll do a product shot test. We'll do some handheld stabilization tests. We're gonna do some night shots where we don't have a lot of light to work with. We'll put both of these cameras into 1080p and shoot at 120 frames per second. We'll do a dynamic range test. Also an exposure transition test to see how fast they can re-expose from shade to direct sunlight. We're gonna look at their ISO grain, we'll do some low light shooting, and I'll also talk about those skin tones in low light. We'll also look at how both cameras render that sun and sky color. We're gonna do all of this in a short amount of time. Today on the Film Alliance. If you were able to figure out which camera got which shot, then I've got to give it to you. This was pretty easy for me because when I created the R50V versus Sony a6700 versus the Fuji X-M5 night only, I became accustomed to how the Canon operates in low light environments. I also have owned the Sony a6700 for a couple years now, and I've shot a couple weddings with it, so I knew what the colors look like out of the Sony. I noticed with Sony cameras, especially in lower light conditions, sometimes your skin tones tend to become greenish or brownish, but that's really only in those low light environments. When we have enough light hitting our subject, the Sony does absolutely fantastic, and the Canon tends to oversaturate a bit. The movement and the amount of motion blur really depends on the shutter speed that we were using, so I'm not really comparing that as much as I'm actually comparing the skin tones here. But when I was in a controlled lighting environment like I had showed you, and I had control over how the scene was being lit, I think the Sony a6700 did a tad better. Now, one aspect of camera comparisons that we have to keep in mind is the lenses that we're using. For this comparison, I used both cameras' kit lenses, the Canon RF 18 to 45mm f4.5 to 6.3, and the Sony E-mount 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 5.6. But I also used the Sigma 10 to 18mm f2.8 in the respective mounts on both of these cameras. And before I forget, if you like videos like this one, make sure to like this video so I know to make more videos like this one. Also, don't forget to join the Film Alliance by subscribing. Let's talk about costs. One of the biggest factors in choosing either of these cameras is the purchasing price. You can get two Canon R50Vs for the price of one Sony a6700. The R50V comes in at $649 US, and that's body alone. The a6700 comes in at $1398 US, and that's body alone. The Canon R50V was released in March of 2025, and the Sony a6700 was released in July of 2023. So the question I have going into this comparison is, do you really get 2 times the amount of features and image quality than you get with the R50V? Well, let's talk about image quality. We'll start off with the low light test that you saw, and you can see right here off the bat, the shadows in the Canon R50V are pretty crushed, whereas the Sony a6700 lifts up those midtones a bit in camera. And as we talked about in the beginning of this video, when you're in a low light situation like this, you can see that the Canon actually performs a little bit better, at least to my eyes. To my surprise, the Canon has finally seemed to catch up to Sony's world-renowned autofocus system, at least in this particular shot. I'm using the kit lenses here, which definitely plays a big role, but it seems like they both have the same autofocus speed. Check out this backlighting shot. If you look at the trees, you can see that the Canon seems to have more details in the shadows. This is a lighting situation where the Canon's shadows outperformed the Sony. The Sony looks like it may need some color adjustment in post-production, but in this exposure transition test, the Sony started to do a little bit better once the sun started to hit my face. You can see how quickly the Canon oversaturates my skin tone, and it takes a little bit longer to re-expose in auto exposure. In this slow motion shot of the flock of the birds, you can see that both cameras did very well. The slow motion is very smooth, and the bird's wings have a lot of detail in both of these shots. Don't forget this is 1080. But in this slow motion shot, when I changed the camera angle a little bit, you can see that the differences in their color science becomes more obvious. Canon's 1080 shot looks a little bit more vibrant than Sony's. Both can shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second, but the a6700 can push it up to 120 frames per second in 4K. Also, the Canon's 4K 60 comes with a tremendous crop. Almost makes it unusable unless you're using a wide lens. I've noticed that Canon's images are usually a little bit more saturated than Sony, and as we continue to look at all these shots through the rest of this video, hopefully you'll be able to see what I mean. And it's kind of interesting because both cameras paired with their same kit lenses produce the same exact color sun while we were in auto white balance. But I do like the lens flare that I get with the Sony a6700's kit lens with its more starburst effect. For this specific shot, the Sony a6700 did much better than the Canon, and this is because the a6700 has in-body image stabilization, whereas the Canon only has an electronic stabilization for video. I flipped my tripod upside down to get this walking shot on the ground, and the a6700 did much better, and that's just because of the stabilization options that we talked about earlier. But in this vlog test, I think the Sony does just a little bit better than the Canon when it comes to stabilization. My lens choice for either of these cameras would be the Sigma 10 to 18mm, like you're seeing here, because with stabilization on, you get that crop. It's going to give you a little bit better of a looking frame. I was noticing that every single time I shot in 0.0 on the exposure compensation meter with the R50V, it seemed to slightly overexpose my shots. Just look at the clouds to see what I mean. When I switch over to -1.0, at least for this landscape type of shot, the Canon seemed like I finally got a handle on all of those highlights. Both of these shots look really good. And then I took it down even one more stop to -2 on the exposure compensation meter, and this is about where I would be if I was shooting this landscape shot with the Canon. If I was shooting this shot with the Sony, I would probably leave it at -1. There's more grain in this particular shot with the Canon R50V, and that's probably because I was using the kit lens, which has a max aperture of f4.5, while the Sony goes to f3.5, so that means I had to bump the ISO a little bit higher with the R50V so I could match exposure with both cameras. And when taking up my ISO, that's going to introduce more noise. Now, in an almost pitch black environment, when I'm exposing for this fire, you can see again how much of those shadows are being crushed with the Canon R50V compared to the midtones being lifted up with the Sony a6700. And in this landscape shot, I see more of that shadow crushing color profile that's in the standard color profile that we got with the Canon R50V, whereas the a6700 again lifts up those midtones in camera. Now, before we jump into features and functionality, let's listen to both cameras' native audio. Here's our vlog type of headshot with the Canon R50V set to 4K 24. I had to redo this shot because before I had set it to 120 frames per second. And now we're doing a vlog type of headshot with the Sony a6700. I do have active stabilization on, and I'm using the Sigma lens on the end of it. Let me know which one you thought sounded better and which one you would choose as a vlog camera. I jumped into the studio to test out how each of these cameras would perform under a green screen. And both cameras did extremely well. It seems like the Canon has a little bit more detail in the shadows than the Sony a6700. Although I may have overexposed the a6700 just a tad, I could use either of these cameras as my green screen camera. If I was to try to get product shots, there's a pretty big difference in the colors, especially in this controlled lighting environment. You can see that in the detail of both of these products. As per usual, you can see that the Canon oversaturates a little bit and also crushes those shadows. And I'm seeing the same type of thing here with these color checkers. Looks like I get a little bit more saturation with the Canon R50V, along with the darker shadows in the background than I get with the a6700. In this macro shot, look at the difference in the colors of this product shot. The a6700 has a cooler tone, whereas the Canon R50V almost has a pinkish tone. I would prefer the a6700 for macro shots, mainly because it has an electronic viewfinder. And then I also did a sharpness test of both of these cameras. I zoomed in about 5,000% to see which camera actually has more detail. And lo and behold, the Sony a6700's 26 megapixel sensor seems to be a little bit more sharp than the Canon R50V's 24 megapixel sensor. The Sony a6700 retains more detail in that D when I go back and forth like this. The grip with the Sony a6700 is much better than the Canon. It comes out a lot farther and allows me to actually hold the camera much more securely and comfortably. Both cameras have similar number of buttons on the outside of the cameras. I like using buttons so that I don't have to touch the display and muddy it up. And as you can see here, a huge difference with both of these cameras' body is the electronic viewfinder that you get with the Sony a6700. And it's for that reason, if you're into photography, I would definitely choose the a6700. Not only because you get more megapixels at 26 megapixels, but also because when I'm shooting photography, it's hard to expose my shots if I'm only using a display. I also like the color science of the Sony better than the Canon R50V. But if we were shooting in RAW, this wouldn't really matter. Both cameras have a mic port, a headphone port, a micro HDMI port, and a USB-C port for charging, transfer, and live streaming. And the Canon has a smaller remote input port. The Sony a6700 uses the APS-C 100 batteries, which is a rechargeable lithium-ion battery. The R50V uses the LPE17 batteries, and then definitely doesn't last as long as the Sony's. The Sony's battery outlasted the Canon by 2 to 1 while I was using both of them out in the field. But the Canon's menu system is a lot easier to navigate. I wish I could put Canon's menu system in Sony cameras, or at least I wish I could have done this when I first started, because now I've gotten the hang of Sony menu systems. But the Canon is so easy to just pick up and go out and start using. But both cameras do have touch capabilities on their display. At the end of the day, the Canon R50V and the Sony a6700 are more than capable. They each have their own strengths depending on the lighting, the lens, and the look that you're going for. If you're on a tighter budget and you're just getting started, the R50V gives you a lot for that price. But if you want more control, sharper images, a stronger low light performance, you want to go out and shoot some photography, then the Sony a6700 might be worth the extra cost. Because I'm in the Sony ecosystem, I much prefer Sony cameras. Not only because I'm going to get a lot bigger of a selection when it comes to their lenses, but also because I like the overall look and colors out of a Sony camera over Canon cameras. But for the price, you get a lot of bang for your buck with the Canon R50V, and if I was on a budget, then I would absolutely pick this camera up. I hope this video helps you in your search for your particular camera. Let me know which one you like better and why. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. One of the most asked questions I receive is, which camera should I buy? I know that you want to make the right decision, and it is a big decision. You want to find the camera that best suits your needs and stays within your budget. Many of you know which camera might be good for you, but you need some guidance pinpointing it and feeling confident in your decision. That's why I made this course. I want to put my camera experience and knowledge into a compact and easy to follow format. This course is jam-packed with camera buying fundamentals that I guarantee you will carry with you through the rest of your camera journey. I base this course on all the things that I wish I had known or someone had told me when I first started out. From understanding different camera types and their features to matching them with your specific needs, this course covers it all. After finishing, I'm confident that you're gonna have clarity over every angle and aspect that you must consider when you're shopping for a camera. I'll guide you through my entire process, taking you 90% of the way there, This way you'll be well prepared to make your decision. This is essentially all of the guidance that I would give my own brother if he asked, "Hey Joe, which camera should I buy?" Now I'm sharing that insight with you. I'll see you in the first module.